The cork popped like a gunshot across the sun-drenched terrace of Domaine Laurent, and in that single crystalline second, while the 1974 Cabernet breathed for the first time in half a century, my entire life cracked open and spilled across the white tablecloth like blood-red wine no one had ordered. Everyone smiled the way people smile when they know the bottle costs more than most mortgages. My father lifted his glass to the Napa Light, eyes shining with the kind of pride that had never once been aimed at me. "To Camille," he said, voice warm and rehearsed. 30 years old and already the finest sommelier in San Francisco. We always knew you'd make us proud." My mother dabbed the corner of her eye with a napkin that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "To our brilliant girl." I forced the smile I'd been perfecting since childhood and raised my glass of sparkling water. I had the dinner shift at Etoile later. I couldn't drink, not even on my birthday. Not even when the tasting menu was $450 before wine pairings. That was the exact moment the golf cart rolled up the gravel path like a slow-moving missile. The man driving it was 83 years old, brown as a barrel stave, wearing a faded Domaine Laurent cap and a grin sharp enough to shave truffles. My grandfather, Henri Laurent, living legend. The man who hadn't spoken to my parents in 8 years and who I hadn't seen in person since I was 21. He killed the engine with a flick of his wrist, stood slowly, and walked straight to our table, carrying a dusty bottle cradled like a sleeping child. Conversation at every surrounding table died instantly. Even the cicadas seemed to hold their breath. Henri didn't greet anyone. He simply set the bottle down in front of me, label facing me. Chateau Laurent, Napa Valley, 1974. My birth year. Handwritten in faded ink beneath the crest. Pour Camille, le jour où elle reviendra. For Camille, the day she comes back. Then he looked at my parents and spoke in the calm, French-accented voice that once made Robert Parker cry. "Camille, ma petite," he said, "when exactly were you planning to tell her she owns the entire valley?" My mother's fork slipped from her manicured fingers and clattered against Rosenthal porcelain like a guillotine. My father actually choked on the 1974. I stared at the label. My name, my year, my grandfather's handwriting. Henri pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat like a king who had never once abdicated. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Domaine Laurent," he continued, gesturing through the glass walls at the endless silver-green rows that rolled to the Mayacamas like an ocean of money. 1,200 acres of the most valuable dirt on the planet, 3 Michelin-starred restaurants, a 10-year waiting list, the single greatest library of pre-phylloxera Cabernet in North America, was deeded solely and irrevocably to Camille Laurent on her 21st birthday. He let that settle for 3 heartbeats. "Your parents have been leasing it back from her for the last 9 years at $28 million a year and pretending it still belonged to them." The sommelier, my old friend Julian, dropped an entire flight of Riedel glasses. They shattered like ice on marble. My mother found her voice first, high and brittle. "Papa, this is absurd. We've been managing—" "Stealing," Henri corrected softly, almost kindly. "The word you are looking for, Isabelle, is stealing." He slid a thick leather folder across the table the way a poker player slides in every chip he owns. Inside were documents that rewrote my entire childhood. The original deed, recorded at the Napa County Recorder on the exact day I turned 21, grantee Camille Marguerite Laurent, in fee simple absolute. 9 years of lease agreements signed by David and Isabel Chen, doing business as Laurent Family Management LLC, paying themselves $28 million annually in management fees. A second set of books showing the real gross profit, $94 million a year. Wire transfers to personal accounts in Singapore, the Caymans, Liechtenstein, and a Delaware LLC in my mother's maiden name. A forged power of attorney with my signature that I had never signed. And on top, a single post-it in Henry's handwriting. They were going to wait until I died, then sell to a conglomerate for $2 billion and keep every cent. The two Chinese investors at the table started speaking rapid Mandarin and backing their chairs away like the linen had caught fire. Craig, my parents' business manager, actually stood up to leave. Henry's vineyard dog, a 120-pound Great Pyrenees named Bacchus, who had been lying under the table the entire time, stood up too, and sat on Craig's foot. Craig sat back down. My father's face had gone the color of oxidized Chardonnay. My mother was crying the way only rich women know how to cry, silently, beautifully, photogenically useless. "Darling," she whispered, reaching for my hand, "we were going to give it all back when you were ready." I laughed. It came out raw and ugly and perfect. "You gave me a $500 Christmas check every year while charging me $28 million in rent?" I stood up so fast my chair fell over backward. Henry placed the master keyring in my palm, 12 antique iron keys tied with faded red vineyard twine. "Everything is yours now, Camille. The houses, the cellars, the contracts, the library, the legacy. Security has been briefed with new orders effective 1 minute ago. Your parents have 15 minutes to leave the property before they are removed." My father tried one last time, voice cracking. "Camille, think of the brand." "The brand," I said, tasting iron in my mouth, "will survive without parasites." I looked at the food blogger who had been live streaming the entire lunch for her 2 million followers. "Feel free to post that," I told her. She did. Within 30 minutes, #NapaHeist was the #1 trending topic worldwide. The clip had 80 million views, and Decanter magazine had already texted me asking for an exclusive. I didn't answer any of them. I just walked out of the dining room, past the stunned guests, past the vines that had been mine for 9 years without me knowing, and I didn't stop until I reached the highest hill on the property, where the original stone house sat watching over everything like a tired old god. Henri found me there at sunset, barefoot in the dirt, holding the 1974 bottle like a weapon. He didn't speak for a long time. We just watched the light bleed out of the sky and into the grapes. Finally, he said, very quietly, "I should have told you sooner." I shook my head. They would have found a way to take it anyway. "I was ashamed," he admitted. "Ashamed I raised the daughter capable of this. Ashamed I let them keep you from me." I looked at him then. Really looked. The man who had taught me to taste the difference between east-facing and west-facing fruit when I was 9 years old. The man who once told me that great wine is just the earth's way of remembering sunlight. "You gave me the only thing that ever mattered," I said. "You gave me the dirt." He smiled, small and sad and proud all at once. "No, ma petite. I gave you the choice of what to grow in it." That night, I slept in the stone house for the first time, not as a guest, not as a summer kid sneaking in after curfew, as the owner. The sheets smelled like lavender and barrel room, and every summer I thought I had lost. I cried until the pillow was soaked. Then I got up and opened every window so the vineyard could come inside and see that I was finally home. The next morning, I fired everyone who had known. Craig was escorted off property in the same golf cart Henri had arrived in. My parents tried to enter through the front gate at 10 a.m. with a moving truck and 2 lawyers. Security turned them away. I watched from the terrace on closed-circuit cameras while drinking coffee from the same chipped mug I used when I was 15. My mother left 17 voicemails that day. They went from pleading, to bargaining, to threatening, to silence. I saved everyone. By the second week, the story was everywhere. Vogue wanted me on the cover in a ball gown made of grapevines. The New York Times called it the most delicious hostile takeover in gastronomic history. My old classmates from Davis sent messages that started with congratulations and ended with subtle requests for allocation. I ignored them all. Instead, I walked the rows at dawn with Elena, the vineyard manager who had once let me sleep in her trailer when I had nowhere else to go during harvest. "They told us you didn't want it," she said, eyes wet. "That you chose the city, that you were ashamed of the dirt. We hated them for turning you into the villain." I stopped between two rows of 60-year-old Cabernet and pressed my palm to the soil. It was still cool from the night. "I was never ashamed," I said. "I was starving." Elena hugged me so hard my ribs creaked. That afternoon, I promoted her to general manager and gave her a 400% raise, backdated to the day I turned 21. Then I called Estival and quit on speakerphone while the entire kitchen staff cheered so loudly the health department probably wrote it up. I kept only one thing from my old life. The black apron I'd worn for 8 years, stained with Cabernet and tears and tips I couldn't afford to lose. I hung it in the tasting room like a battle flag. The first harvest under my name was the hardest thing I've ever done. I worked 18-hour days alongside the crews who had been here since before I was born. I drove the tractor until my hands blistered. I slept in the winery on a cot beside the tanks because I couldn't stand to be more than 10 feet from the fruit. My parents filed lawsuit after lawsuit. I countersued for $412 million in damages, emotional distress, and fraud. The judge fast-tracked it. Discovery was brutal. We found the villa in Cap Dundibs they'd bought with my money. The Birkin collection, the private jet hours, the consulting fees paid to shell companies named after their dogs. They declared bankruptcy 6 months later. Their Los Gatos house went into foreclosure. Mom started selling real estate in Pleasanton, posting inspirational quotes about resilience on LinkedIn. Dad gave corporate keynotes titled Ethics in Family Business, Lessons from Failure. The irony was thicker than sediment. Henri moved into the guest cottage permanently. His health had been declining for years, but something about seeing me take the reins again lit a fire in him that medicine never could. Every morning, we drank coffee on the porch and argued about barrel toast levels and whether to graft the old block to Petit Verdot. He still won most of the arguments, but he let me think I was winning. 1 year to the day after the lunch that changed everything, I opened the 1974 again. Just the two of us, at sunrise, on the same hill where I had stood barefoot and shaking the year before. Henri raised his glass with a trembling hand. To the only Laurent who ever deserved the name. I cried into my wine. He pretended not to notice. He died 3 weeks later, peacefully, in the cottage with the windows open so he could smell the vines. I buried him beneath the oldest block, the one he planted with his own hands in 1948. No casket, just a linen shroud and a bottle of the 1974 poured straight into the soil. The entire valley shut down for the funeral. Every winemaker in Napa came. Some flew in from Bordeaux and Piemonte. They brought dirt from their own vineyards and sprinkled it into the grave like a global communion. I didn't speak. I just opened a Jeroboam of 1961 Laurent and passed it around until it was empty. Then I went back to work. 5 years later, the waiting list is now 15 years long. We released the first wine under my sole name last spring, Camille Laurent, Cuvée Grand Mère, 2018. 100 cases. It sold out in 11 minutes at $5,000 a bottle and scored a perfect 100 from every critic who matters. I kept one case. It's in the cellar next to the empty 1974. I still live in the stone house. I still drink coffee on the same porch. The chipped mug is gone. Elena broke it last year and cried for an hour. My parents live in a 2-bedroom condo in Sacramento now. Mom sends me birthday cards with kittens on them. Dad's keynotes dried up.
Nobody wants to hear about ethics from a man who stole from his own child. I never pressed criminal charges. Some people said that made me weak.
They're wrong. Having to live with what they did, knowing the entire world watched them lose everything they valued more than me, is a longer sentence than any prison. Sometimes tourists ask for photos in front of the famous terrace where it all happened. I let them. I even smile. But every year on my birthday, I do two things without fail. At sunrise, I walk to Henri's grave with a fresh bottle and pour a glass straight onto the dirt. At midnight, I climb the highest hill with whatever vintage feels right, open it, and drink alone under the same stars that have watched this valley for 100 million years. Last year, I opened the very last 1974. I poured half for the vines. I drank the other half so slowly the moon moved across the sky while I swallowed every memory I used to think would kill me. When the bottle was empty, I laid back in the dirt and laughed until I couldn't breathe. Because I finally understood what Henri meant all those years ago when he said great wine isn't made, it's translated. And some stories, some betrayals, some heartbreaks only make sense when you let them age in the dark long enough to become something magnificent. The valley is quiet now. The vines are mine. The legacy is mine. And for the first time in my life, nobody is leasing my future from me. If you ever feel like the world decided who you are allowed to become before you got a say, remember this. Sometimes the greatest vintage is the one nobody thought you were capable of growing. Sometimes the cork that finally pops is the sound of every lie you were ever told exploding all at once. And sometimes the only way to get back what was stolen from you is to become the kind of woman who can take it, quietly, completely, and without apology. Drink accordingly. The dirt remembers everything. I do too. And I have 12 antique keys that open every single door my parents ever tried to lock me out of. Cheers.